Hi everyone, it's Jan from Jan Plans Things, and today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to show you this new set of paints that I've just gotten, and I'm just going to show you how I set up paints when I first get them, as well as what I'm looking for when I'm purchasing paints, and then at the end I'll test the paints on a painting that I've done, that I've prepared, and okay, well, let's get started. So these are the White Knight paints, and a lot of really great artists use them, and they're a company from Russia. This is the 30. Can't speak today. This is the 36 set. And let me see. And it comes in these pants. I haven't seen them available with the with tubes yet in Australia. So let's have a look at this. So this it comes in this white case. White Knights is also known as Saint Petersberg, and they've also got another name which I will not pronounce because I do not want to embarrass myself. But these are the White Knight paints, and one reason why I've become really interested in these is because they're really well priced. And let's have a look. So this one here snaps off if you want to use that as a separate tray, or you can leave it there because it's actually, this is quite big. The whole tray is quite huge once you've done it all together. And it's also got a little note here which is all in Russian, so I have no idea what that says. So the tray is made out of a white plastic, and I don't really enjoy using plastic trays too much because I always feel like they stain a little bit. So I'll probably be pairing this with one of my ceramic dishes, which I'll show you just here. And so this is like 36 full pans. A full pan is this size, and I'm going to show you, this is a handmade watercolor set by London Gifties, and a half pan is just half of that. And my schmink pans are this size, and a lot of ones you normally get at this one. But I guess the thing is, like, you can buy a 12 set of the basics from the St. Petersburg range for around 50 AUD, which is just absolutely fantastic value, because one of these is pretty much equivalent to a tube of paint. And my tube of paint from Daniel Smith, one of them might cost 20 AUD. So this is actually, it's really good value, which is why I'm quite interested in it. And so each of the paints come individually wrapped, which is pretty normal. And I'm just going to check if I can see the pigment numbers on there anyway. It says it's 2.5 mil. And what is really interesting here, it's got the pigment number, which is PY35. So when you're buying a lot of watercolors, especially when you're buying really expensive watercolors, what you're paying for is like the purity of the pigment, the mixing agent that it's with, and how light fast it is. So a lot of these paints, so this one here, this has PY35 and 3 stars, so it means it's very light fast. And light fastest means that it won't fade so much if you've got it exposed to sunlight, and that might be really important if you're an artist who's selling their works. But for those of you like me who's using it mostly to paint in your journal, I don't think it matters so much how light fast it is. But but for those of you who are looking to sell your paintings in the future, then this information might be really important to you to see how light fast the pigments are. Some of these paints, like for example the purple, it's got PV3 on it, which is kind of interesting. PV19. I would have expected to have more than one color pigment listed on these, but it's okay. So have a look. So the other thing is, if you look at these pigment numbers, you'd be able to compare it to a lot of other big brands as well. in regards to which pigments are which. And what you want to be careful with is a lot of them might have more than one pigment mixed into it. And when it has more than one pigment, what that might mean for you is that when you're mixing the two colors together, because there's other pigments in there, it doesn't end up the color you think, or it ends up a little bit muddy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unwrap everything, and then I'm going to swatch them. Now when I'm swatching them, what you'll see me do is I'm going to draw a line. I'll close this for a second. I'm just going to draw, I'll be drawing a line in the middle of each of these rectangles. And the reason for that is because I want to see how opaque the color is. And by that I mean like how sometimes when it's mixed with white or some of the cadmiums in the yellows, they're actually extremely opaque. So when you paint over the black doesn't show through as much, and that might change how you mix the colors. So you might want to mix two translucent colors together to get something that looks a little bit more clean and clear. Or sometimes if you want something slightly more opaque and you're painting it on top of a translucent color so that it covers up the translucent color underneath, then you might want to mix an opaque color into it. So it's just something that I find good to know. So therefore, when I'm setting up my palettes, I just want to check how each of the pigments work. So I'll be right back, and after I swatch them, we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll try doing a test painting. So the St. Petersberg paints, they use honey as their base. I think a couple of other brands do this too, like Sennelier as well. And it just means, in theory, it should re-wet a little bit better. I'll have to check that as well. But I also find that because I've had one or two pans of the Sennelier in the past, okay, hi Humphrey, and they stick a little bit to the papers, so I had a little bit of trouble removing some of them, but I do like unwrapping watercolors. It's a bit like having candy, like happy fun art candy, and then unwrapping them and having nice little pockets of color inside. What you can see me doing here is I'm wetting the corner first of the paper, and then I'm kind of just dabbing the pigment, because I kind of want to see how much the pigment travels as well across, and it'll look a little bit different once it dries as well. So that's just something to consider, because some of the pigments actually travel quite a bit when you're painting with them, and that might be an effect you want to achieve. Okay, so I've just finished swatching all of the paints. I let it dry overnight because I actually wanted to see how they reacted, and like a lot of these are actually really nice bright paints. So I had a look at the old handprint review from ages back, and one of the major problems they thought was the light fastness of the paints, so how they fade under the sun. But I feel like this is an excellent value set for what you get. I mean, these are double the size of what you normally get in a half pan set, and maybe like a third of the price that you might pay. And the colors are quite lovely. I mean, some of them have interesting names, like this is just green, or it's just blue or something like that. But otherwise, I feel like they tried to name most of the paints, and they are as what you would expect, like a quinacridone rose or gold, and they've got ultramarine, and also like the browns that you would mix it with. You might have seen me halfway through pick this pan up, which was my ultramarine, and there was a little bit of white on it. This one has white too, but this is just paper that's stuck to it. This one I thought might have had mold on it, so I had to be really careful of that. The problem is ultramarine is kind of like a critical color in your palette to mix with other colors. So I had to cut the top off and wash it with some alcohol, just to make sure that the mold was only on the surface, which I think it was, because it looks like overnight nothing's come back. And then I've also left it open so it dried to air as well. And then I had a look at some of the other colors. Like we've got some colors like this one, which is beautifully granulating. The granulating is kind of like that kind of splotchiness that you see. And then a lot of other colors that are that have stayed quite bright, like this blue here, this rose, and then this is like a gorgeous color. I really like this blue-gray color. It's kind of like one of my favorite filling in colors. They've also got a Payne's gray and a neutral black and a sepia for tinting. This row here is very similar to my shrink palette, so I'm quite used to those colors. But what I would normally do then is test a couple of mixes, but I find that the best way for me to test mixes is to actually try it painting. So I might do that now, and what you'll be able to see on my left would be me actually testing the paints and testing some mixes, because I'm not quite sure how some of these colors have shown up yet because it's not my regular palette. And you might have also seen me a little bit through that. Sorry, I'll pick up a smaller brush, just resting a brush in here, because you can fit a brush in here, which is kind of awesome, although this is kind of like a bit of a huge palette to be taking around anywhere for travel. I will be testing also the same brand brushes. These are the Kolinsky sable brushes. Now, I really enjoy using Kolinsky sable brushes. I have my two favorites, which are the Winsor Newton version of this. This one's an Isabey. So I saw these, and they're much cheaper than the Winsors. So I'm interested to see how these perform. So I hope you guys enjoy the painting. I'll try and talk through that a little bit as well. So I'll see you guys right afterwards. Okay, so I'm painting everything in my the perfect sketchbook is what the sketchbook is called. It was run on Indiegogo, I think maybe it's been a few years now, and it's still my favorite sketchbook, and I'm very sad that they never kept on going with making them, because I think they just ended up being too expensive to be profitable. But I still love my notebook. It's got, it uses Fabriano Artistico cold press 300 GSM paper. It's this gorgeous, like rough grain paper that I find that holds watercolor really well. I've also had a lot of people asking me, and I might have mentioned it before, like how come my pens don't really bleed when I paint over them, and that's because I'm really careful to use ink that is water fast or waterproof. So always check that before you're drawing, because like Stabilos and stuff, they're not they're water-based ink, so they'll definitely run while you paint on them. You can see me sticking a napkin underneath my hand, because the Pentel pocket brush pen actually takes, I think, 24 hours to dry completely, but it's still dry to touch within a couple of minutes. But if I'm drawing like this, it does tend to smudge a little bit, so the paper napkin just helps that, because it'll smudge a lot more easily with the oils in your hand compared to like a dry napkin just sitting on top of that. So I'm using that first, and what I try to do most of the time is draw from left to right to minimize the smudging, but sometimes that's just not possible. So that's just something to consider as well when you're drawing, especially if you're really impatient like I am. So I've also picked the pocket brush pen because of the variation in the line work. I think if I was doing this as an actual architectural drawing, I would have done it probably with a micron instead and slowly built up the lines, but because I kind of wanted to do this quickly and have a little bit of variation in there already, that's why I've used the pocket brush. If I was using the micron, I would have been a bit more careful with how I hatch details, as well as how I built up a couple of lines, and used probably a mixture of 0.1 to 0.8 pens. And also, I don't know how to write Chinese characters, so if I have Chinese and Japanese characters, so if I've done that wrong, I apologize in advance. So this is probably one of my favorite scenes in Spirited Away. I picked this painting because it had like really nice bright saturated colors, and I wanted to see how the paints perform with that. What you see me doing here is I've mixed I think it's a burnt sienna with an ultramarine to make that kind of blue-grey color. The blue-grey that I swatched on the side, the Payne's grey, was a little bit too blue, so I'm going to use that to darken it later. But what I like to do first is build up the shadows. And I guess another technique to do this a little bit better would have been to use the sepia color, because a lot of the bathhouse is warm, and I could have used the sepia to do the tonal first. I like doing it this way because I kind of feel like it adds depth very quickly to a painting. And then I kind of also feel like it helps it bring it to life a lot faster as well. So afterwards I'm going through with the Payne's Grey because I can kind of dip that one directly into the pan to get it really dark, just to accentuate some of the really deep shadows, so the ones that are like just behind poles or just underneath the window frames, and where it would normally be the darkest. I've kind of approximated a lot of this as well as while I was sketching it, because I think not all of it is quite correct. You can see me off to the left here. I'm swatching the color first because I'm not quite used to using these paints yet. I'm doing a few mixes based on what I think it should be from the color card that I swatched earlier, but I did want to check beforehand how it looks on the paper. It does help when you're using a white palette like the one I have here, to see what the colors might look like on the page. You can also see me going back and I'm filling up the color again because I guess I mixed a little bit too much water in the paint, and it's the tonal shift on the paint is a little bit more than I thought it would be. So I'm going back and rebuilding the colors a lot. And for the greens on the plants, I've actually done a lot of dipping directly into the pan to get that really bright color. I also found the browns and the reds faded a little bit as well, more than I am used to with the Daniel Smith, but it just means that I have to adjust my painting technique a little bit. So I'm using first off, I mix that red first, and I found that after I painted under the roof that it was a little bit too opaque. The color didn't reveal enough of the black line for me, and I was worried that it was covering up a lot of the details. So what I did was I went back and looked at the color chart and tried to mix that terracotta red using colors that weren't opaque. So I think that worked out pretty well, but it also meant that I had like light red at the top and then a much brighter red at the bottom. And I've just gone back now and slowly built up the color a little bit. And you can kind of see it's kind of faded to this like reddish orangey color, but that was okay because what I've done is I've just gone back and using the tip of the brush and quite lightly I've just done little strokes to make it look like there's texture on the wall, because I feel like it just wouldn't be that flat. So that's how I did that one. And I'm mixing with these colors that I'm using when I'm going back and darkening them as well, and just putting in some of the shadows. You can see me using the colors that are already existing on the palette, and then mixing them with the grays so that the tones are similar all the way through. You can kind of also see the shadows that I painted at the very beginning are still very apparent on the paper as well, so they still show through, so that's something to consider. And that's something that's quite nice about watercolor, because you slowly overlay and build up the depth in the picture. I think the other thing as well was that I wasn't quite used to mixing a lot of these colors because there was so many. My everyday palette that you guys see me using a lot is like a redacted version of only 17 colors. I'm like really used to mixing those colors out. And then suddenly I was just spoiled for choice with this palette of 36 with like more than double what I was used to. So I was just I was sometimes a little bit confused about which colors to mix to get the effects I wanted. So there was a lot of experimentation on the palette, and then a little bit of swatching as well on the paper to the side. So that's something that I had to deal with as well. It's something to consider when you're using a brand new palette. It might not perform the way you're used to. Now then I started using this blue, and I thought this blue was lovely, and apparently so did Humphrey, because at this point he decided that this is when he was going to sit on my notebook and try to attack my paints. He did manage to sit in the palette afterwards, so I had to clean that up a little bit. But otherwise, I really like that blue. It just faded absolutely beautifully. And the rains have started outside, so I'm sorry if there's a little bit of roaring in the background. And it's just I found that using these paints, after a while, I started to really enjoy how they were looking. The grey itself just granulated beautifully, and they layer up really nicely, and there's still a little bit of transparency in it. So I quite enjoyed doing that, and and some of the colors aren't too staining. So sometimes you saw me use the paper towel when I've like screwed up the painting a little bit, and if I dabbed it on, the paint still lifted off the page if I was fast enough. So it's good to correct little mistakes and errors. So that's something that's really good as well. I've also been going at the very end. What you see me do now is I'm just using the white gouache to just kind of brighten up the center of the page a little bit, and I've used just masking tape around the edges of the notebook to give that really nice clean line. So yeah, that's this painting. I've kind of really enjoyed doing it, and it's really fun, obviously trying out some new colors. All right, so I've let the painting dry overnight because I noticed while I was painting there was a little bit of fade happening, and that's kind of like tonal shift when as the paint dries, it looks a little bit lighter than it was on the palette. You can kind of see I've painted it on the ceramic palette, and the colors have stayed pretty true to what I've done there. I did find that the reds faded a bit and the browns faded a bit as I was painting. I just had to make sure to layer it up while I was working on it. Yeah, so basically I had to make sure while I was working on it that the colors were not fading as I thought. But the blue, like even on the first pass, turned out absolutely beautiful. There was it was kind of weird using a palette that I wasn't used to because I was unsure how to mix a few colors, but overall I reckon it's an excellent value set for what you get. I mean, you don't normally get like this many paints for this price. I mean, overall I think that's just absolutely fantastic for the amount that you receive. And I mean, like if you're doing a transition from like store-bought like kids watercolor and you're looking for something a little bit more and you have a little bit of money to spend, like this might be a really good way to begin. I did try a couple of the new brushes as well. I tried the Isabey. This one I didn't mind so much. The problem was that it did streak a little on the downward and upward strokes, but I feel like it's still quite a good Kolinsky brush. The ones from White Nights were like, I love this brush. I mean, it's like beautiful white handle and everything, but still look how pointy it is once it's finished. It's a beautiful brush and it performs fantastically for the price that it is. So they're a pretty good investment as well. I mean, like my Winsor Newton brushes are way more expensive, and you can tell as well, I guess, with a lot of watercolors you can watercolor and art materials, you kind of get what you pay for. But I feel like these are an excellent value buy. I mean, a lot of these colors, they weren't as transparent as I had hoped, because with the Schmidt colors and the Daniel Smith colors, they look fantastic, so they don't really cloud the blacks at all. Like a lot of the reds I found quite cloudy on the black lines, but I was able to mix this color by using like a French red as well as a quinacridone rose, so I managed to get around that. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this set. I think I'll continue using it into the future as well. It's like something a bit different. It's not compact, that's for sure. I mean, like this is definitely like a studio thing, but I might end up removing a couple of these pans and putting them into some travel pans as well, because there are a lot of colors here. Like this green is beautiful, and that blue that I used, this one here, was fantastic, that I probably will use more in the future as well. So that's it for my review today. I hope you guys found that useful. I'm sorry it was a little bit long, but I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.